So as we started the show talking about, late tonight, the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to immediately pause a federal judge's ruling that required the administration to fully fund SNAP for the month of November. And we just got word from the Supreme Court that they have granted the Trump administration's request. There are nearly 42 million Americans that rely on the SNAP program. Most of them, as I started the show talking about, children, seniors, or people with disabilities, families across the country.
Imagine waking up to find the money you rely on to feed your family has simply vanished. For 42 million Americans, that nightmare became a reality this month. We're talking about the shutdown of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and how a political standoff in Washington has triggered a nationwide food crisis. Stick with us as we unpack what's happening, why it matters to everyone, and what could happen next. So let's start with the basics. SNAP, which many of us still know as food stamps, is the nation's most important anti-hunger program. It helps low-income families, children, seniors, and people with disabilities afford groceries. We're not just talking about the unemployed. Nearly 40% of SNAP households are working, but their wages just aren't enough to cover basic needs. But at the beginning of November, for the first time in its 60-year history, the program went dark. The funding just stopped. Why? It's a casualty of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, which began on October 1st. This triggered a frantic legal battle. A federal judge in Rhode Island, John McConnell, called the administration's actions unconscionable and ordered the USDA to find the money to fully fund the program by Friday, November 7th. He accused the White House of withholding benefits for political reasons. But in a dramatic turn, the Trump administration appealed to the Supreme Court. And just hours before the deadline, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson issued a temporary stay, allowing the government to withhold about $4 billion in funding for now. It's a temporary pause, a legal limbo, while the lower courts hash it out. But for millions of families, that legal limbo means empty cupboards. The human cost is staggering. Food banks already strained have seen a 12-fold increase in new families seeking help. One food bank director in Philadelphia described it as going from a brownout to a blackout. And in a cruel twist of irony, many of those in line are federal workers who have been furloughed or are working without pay. One Defense Department employee told a reporter, "I usually donate. The roles are reversed. You never think you're going to find yourself in a challenging position." That one quote really says it all. Let me give you some more context about what this means on the ground. The average SNAP benefit is about $177 per month per person. That might not sound like much, but for families living paycheck to paycheck, it's the difference between having dinner on the table or going to bed hungry. It's the difference between a child being able to concentrate in school or sitting in class with an empty stomach. The program serves a diverse population. Yes, there are unemployed individuals, but there are also working families whose wages simply don't stretch far enough. There are elderly people on fixed incomes, there are people with disabilities who face additional barriers to employment, and there are children, millions of children, who didn't choose their circumstances but are bearing the consequences of this political crisis. So, how did we get here? This isn't just about SNAP, it's about a bitter political fight that has paralyzed Washington. The government shutdown itself was triggered by a deadlock over healthcare, specifically expiring subsidies for health insurance premiums on the Affordable Care Act marketplace. But it's also part of a larger effort by the administration to slash spending on safety net programs. A bill passed over the summer, ironically titled the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, had already laid the groundwork for massive cuts to Medicaid and introduced new work requirements for SNAP recipients. These are requirements that experts say don't actually increase employment, they just make life harder for vulnerable people like veterans, former foster youth, and older adults. The administration has also been using a controversial tactic called pocket rescissions. Essentially, they propose budget cuts so late in the fiscal year that Congress doesn't have the legally required 45 days to respond, effectively trying to bypass Congress's constitutional power of the purse. The Government Accountability Office has called this illegal, but it's happening anyway, creating a genuine constitutional clash over the separation of powers. This is about more than just budget numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the fundamental question of how our government operates and whether the executive branch can unilaterally decide to withhold funds that Congress has appropriated. It's a constitutional crisis wrapped inside a humanitarian crisis. Now, you might be thinking, this is terrible for those 42 million people, but how does it affect me? The truth is, the ripple effects of this crisis will touch every corner of the country. First, let's talk about health. A Harvard study found that SNAP participation reduces healthcare costs by about $1,400 a year per person. When people can't afford food, they get sicker. They skip medications to buy groceries, they delay doctor visits. We'll see more emergency room visits and a rise in chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease. This doesn't save money, it just shifts the cost onto the healthcare system, a cost we all bear through higher insurance premiums and taxes. Think about it this way. If you're choosing between buying insulin and buying food, you're going to end up in the emergency room eventually. And emergency room care is the most expensive form of healthcare. So cutting SNAP benefits doesn't reduce government spending, it just moves that spending from a preventive program that works to an emergency system that's far more costly and less effective. Then there's the economy. That SNAP money doesn't just disappear, it's spent immediately at local grocery stores. For every dollar in SNAP benefits, it generates about $1.50 to $1.80 in economic activity. Pulling billions of dollars out of the economy hurts local businesses, especially in rural areas where a grocery store might be the largest employer. When families can't buy groceries, grocery stores see their sales drop. When grocery stores see sales drop, they order less from suppliers. When suppliers get fewer orders, they may have to lay off workers. It's a downward spiral that affects entire communities, not just SNAP recipients. And it's not just SNAP. The shutdown is also squeezing WIC, the nutrition program for women, infants, and children, and has cut off access to Head Start for over 8,000 children. We are creating long-term damage to the health and educational outcomes of an entire generation. Research shows that children who experience food insecurity have worse educational outcomes, worse health outcomes, and lower lifetime earnings. We're not just creating a crisis today, we're creating problems that will persist for decades. So what happens now? The most likely scenario is that Congress will be forced to act. The recent off-year elections showed that voters are not happy with the shutdown, and the pressure is mounting, especially with the holidays around the corner. But even if a short-term fix is passed, the underlying issues won't go away. We could see an extended crisis with only partial benefits, or a push to make the deep cuts from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act permanent. The future of the social safety net in America is being decided right now in this crisis. There are several possible scenarios. Congress could pass a continuing resolution that ends the shutdown and restores full SNAP funding. The courts could rule in favor of the plaintiffs and order the administration to use contingency funds to cover the gap. Or we could see a prolonged standoff that extends into December and beyond, with devastating consequences for millions of families during the holiday season. This crisis is a stark reminder that budget battles in Washington are not abstract political games. They have real, immediate, and devastating consequences for millions of our neighbors. This is a story about the kind of country we want to be. One that ensures basic food security for its citizens, or one that uses hunger as a political bargaining chip. The research is clear. SNAP is one of the most effective anti-poverty programs we have. It reduces hunger, improves health, and boosts the economy. Study after study has shown that SNAP benefits lift millions of people, especially children, out of poverty. It's not a perfect program, but it's an essential one. If this story moves you, don't just be a passive listener. Contact your elected representatives and demand they end the shutdown and fully fund these vital programs. Support your local food bank, which is on the front lines of this crisis. And most importantly, stay informed and stay engaged. The people affected by this crisis are our neighbors, our coworkers, our family members. They're not statistics, they're real people facing impossible choices, and they need us to speak up. That's all the time we have for today. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay engaged.
Wow.